What's up, cubers? My name's Kenneth. Today I'm going to try to solve the Bagua Cube. So I was able to solve the Bagua Cube, and I must say this was one of the most difficult puzzles I've ever solved, and it was just a lot of fun coming up with a solution because there was just so many challenges you had to overcome to solve this puzzle. So I've only solved the puzzle 3 times, and I've never solved it in one sitting. It's a really kind of a long solve. I tried to solve it in one sitting this morning, but when I did, the puzzle actually exploded and it made a huge mess, and it took me forever to get all the pieces back together. I kind of documented it with my Instagram stories, just trying to put the puzzle all back together. I finally got it back to the solved state, and I tensioned it up so it's a little bit tighter. Hopefully it doesn't explode again. That would be a disaster. So anyway, I hope this video goes smoothly. I hope I'm able to solve it. And yeah, I'm really excited to scramble it up and show you guys kind of how I go about solving the Bagua Cube. So when you scramble the Bagua Cube, there's 3 steps. First, you want to scramble it like a Rubik's Cube. So you just do the normal 3x3 moves, and that will get it kind of messed up like you would expect. Then what you want to do is you want to mess up all of the edges. And to do that without shape shifting, you have to move the top and bottom layers 45 degrees. And then you can do like R2 and F2 and those type of moves. That'll swap 2 corners and also mess up some of the edges. And then you can just kind of do those kind of moves, and you can screw up all of the edges without shape shifting the puzzle. Then once the edges are scrambled, then you can start doing shape shifting. And at that point, you're all scrambled and you're ready to struggle. So this isn't meant to be a tutorial, but I really want to go through each step and kind of explain what I'm trying to do. So the first step is try to get this puzzle back to a cube, and really that is a very challenging thing to do. And there's because of all the shape shifting, it actually switches the corners and the edges together, and then even the edges kind of get misoriented with each other and cause kind of some bandaging. And so it's really challenging to get it back to a cube. I can get through the first 2 layers and get that kind of put back, but then the final layer, that's where I'm really challenged. I have one algorithm that can get rid of an edge that has kind of an X in it, or I don't know what you would call it, or a V. And so I was trying to get it to the final state where all I had was 1 edge with a V or 2 edges with a V, because then I knew I could fix that. So I ended up finally getting there, and yeah, that definitely was the most difficult part of this solve. One other kind of interesting thing when you're trying to get it back to a cube is there's a parity that comes later in the solve, but you can avoid it when you're trying to put it back into a cube. And the parity is formed when one of the centers is turned at an increment of 45 degrees, or actually an odd number of centers are turned at 45 degrees. So you can actually look at the centers and see the symbol, the yin-yang symbol on the centers, and you can check as you're putting it back to a cube that there's an even number of centers that are turned 45 degrees. And if that's the case, then you know you can avoid the parity. But if you have like 1 center turned 45 degrees, you're going to hit the parity. So definitely take a look at those centers, and hopefully your centers aren't popping off. And so what I did is I actually glued my centers in so they wouldn't pop off, so that I can make sure I could avoid that parity, because it's a really terrible parity. You don't want to hit it. And if you do, the way to fix it is you have to actually shape shift the puzzle and turn 1 center 45 degrees to undo the odd parity. So anyway, yeah, that's a terrible parity. Make sure you avoid it, and that's what I'm doing here. I keep checking the centers to make sure that there was an even number of centers at 45 degrees. Unfortunately, the camera turned off after 30 minutes, right as I got it back to a cube. Once you're back to a cube, you want to start pairing up all of the edges, the long, skinny edge pieces. And that's actually not that difficult. What you want to do is you find 2 you want to pair together, put 1 on the top layer, 1 on the bottom layer, and then you do that like top 45 degrees, bottom 45 degrees, and then do like an R2. And that will swing the one from the bottom up to the top and match them together. And then as long as you make sure that the 4 edges that are kind of mixed up when you do that aren't ones you've already solved, you can just go through and do all of them like that and get to the last kind of 4 edges. And just using some simple techniques, you can match those 4 last edges. And yeah, it's pretty easy. Once you get that kind of move down, it feels very similar to doing the edges of like a 4x4. once the edges are all paired together, you want to check for parity. And there's two parities you can get. One is an orientation parity where you have one edge that needs to be flipped. Now that's the really bad one that hopefully you avoided, and that's what I did avoid it in this case, so that wasn't one I had. But then the other parity you can get is also similar to a 4x4. It's this kind of like permutation parity where two edges need to swap places, and that one's a lot easier to solve. You don't have to do shape shifting to kind of like fix that one, and I was able to do that. And then once I had solved that parity, I solved it back to a cube just to double check that I had all the edge parities sorted out. The next step solving the Bagua Cube is to solve the centers, and you really want to just reduce the centers to like a 3x3 center. So around the centers there's those little triangles, and there's 8 of those little triangles, but you really only care at this point about 4 of them to turn the centers into a normal 3x3 center. So to do this, I came up with a simple algorithm that will switch a couple of those triangles, and it's based off of the 90-degree center turning algorithm of a Rubik's Cube. And using that, it's pretty easy, and you can do all of these centers. And it takes a little bit of time because there's just so many of those little triangles. With the centers reduced, now it's time to reduce the edges. And this is probably the hardest step for me to explain, so I really apologize if you get lost here. But to build the edges, you have to build it in steps. So the first step, if we're looking at the yellow and red edge, is to first build a trio of kind of the yellow parts of the edge. So you build 3 of those pieces that go closest to the center, and you build that. So that's step 1, is you match them together. Then you need to move that kind of grouping to the actual yellow-red edge, the long skinny yellow side. So you move it into its position. So then now you've got that saved. So now you have to go and build the red part of the edge. So the little trio. So you build that little red trio, and it's not actually ready to go in yet because the actual edge piece, the piece that has both red and yellow on it, you have to move that into the trio to create this kind of grouping of 4 red pieces and that yellow side. Now you can move that whole thing next to the yellow piece that you've already finished, and you can complete a single edge. So each of these kind of micro steps to build a single edge, it really relies on the same kind of algorithm. And really it's just a corner permuting commutator that would work on a normal Rubik's Cube. But because these edges can be treated like corners, you can move parts of the edges with these corner permuting algorithms. Once you're done with an edge, you can start just building more and more of these edges. And what I do is I leave the white edges for last. That way, as you're building the final white edges, you can kind of use the white edges to like kind of be destroyed as you're building the rest of the edges. And because white is all that's left, you're destroying the white edges with more white edges, and they stay white. So the final step, you have to permute the edge kind of wedges, the final remaining ones. And it's not so bad if all that's left are the ones on the white side. And you can see I have that green-red edge that's misoriented. I left that because once the white ones are all in the correct place, all you have to do is flip them, and I have an algorithm that will flip them. And that green-red one, I decided to leave to the end because I thought it would be just easier to use that algorithm at the very end. And so I have to use the algorithm twice here. The algorithm's a little bit tedious, but this whole puzzle is tedious, so it's not actually so bad compared to the rest of the solve. So of course now the puzzle is reduced to a 3x3. This is a 3x3 now. There is no more parities. I know for sure it will solve like a 3x3. And so yeah, all that's left is to solve the puzzle like a Rubik's Cube. And when you're done, you're pretty happy and you're pretty tired. So anyway, if you got to the end of this video, thanks guys so much for watching this whole thing. I hope it was kind of interesting to someone. And you know, this wasn't really meant to be like a tutorial video. I just kind of wanted to show how I go about solving this puzzle. And in the future, if I forget how I solved it, I'll probably watch this and it'll probably help me
remember kind of what my method was. So I hope it was enjoyable. If you guys liked it, hit the like button. Thank you guys so much for watching, and of course, have a great day.